Okay, in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started then. I'm sure we'll have some folks trickling in as we get started, but we want to welcome all of you and thank you so much for joining us today for our first installment of the research webinar series of 2017. So thank you for joining us. We are the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute. The goal of MVLRI is to expand Michigan's capacity to support new learning models, engage in active research to inform new policies in online and blended learning, and strengthen the state's infrastructures for sharing best practices. Just want to share a little bit of information about our organization before I hand it over to our presenters today. Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute is a division of MVU, or the Michigan Virtual University, a nonprofit organization whose mission is advancing K-12 education through digital learning, research, innovation, policy, and partnerships. MVU's efforts include providing online courses to K-12 students across Michigan and the United States, as well as providing a variety of professional learning opportunities for educators focused on innovative educational practices such as blended learning and providing resources, products, and services to personalize learning options for their students and improve student achievement. Before we do get started, we do just have a quick disclaimer. This webinar will be recorded and shared publicly. Consequently, anything shared during this webinar, including chat comments, could be shared publicly. This webinar may represent a presenter's or an attendee's personal views, opinions, conclusions, and other information which do not necessarily reflect those of MVU and or the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute and are not given nor endorsed by MVU/MVLRI unless otherwise specified. With that, though, I would like to hand it over to our presenters, Joanna Ray and Kendom, I might mispronounce this, Kendom Gayabak, and I'd like them to introduce themselves and go ahead and talk about our topic for today.
I'm not able to hear any audio. I'm wondering if that's what the attendees are also typing. Can't hear. We cannot hear you, Kendom.
Let me know.
Now we can hear you.
Okay, great. I'll reset my intro now. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Justin, for inviting us to present our research today. My name is Kendum Gyabak. I'm a PhD candidate in Indiana University, Bloomington. I'm also an instructional designer here at the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse. And today we'd like to talk to you about Designer Rethinking in K-12 online course design.
Fabulous. Everyone can hear me okay. I'm assuming, hope so. Okay, so my name is Joanna Ray, and I am currently the Principal E-Learning Services Consultant at Indiana University. At the time, I actually was working in a K-12 school district that was in my hometown. And so since then, I've gone to the university, but my background is in K-12 learning, and now I'm supporting higher ed. So what we would like to know from you, if you don't mind taking just a moment, I'm going to actually throw a link in the chat for you, and we just want to know a little bit more about what brings you here today. So I have a link to a Padlet, and if you don't mind just clicking on that link, it's going to open a window for you. And maybe just add a quick box and tell us just a little bit of information about what you're hoping to get out of today's session or what we can share with you. I see Jennifer starting her post-it. Fabulous. So I'm going to kind of read these so that they show up in the recording. So one of the things is the way we're including teachers in the course design process and how we're managing the final product for use. Okay, fabulous. I teach online and just redesigned a grade 12 course over the last summer, looking to do more development and continue to improve, as well as expand other courses. Another attendee is an e-learning teacher, grades 11 and 12. This is fantastic. So we have such a K-12 audience here. Also would like to explore blended learning in my brick and mortar courses that I still have as well. Looking for tips and ideas and best practices to improve my courses. We'll have some resources right over here in this Padlet. We'll also throw it in the chat room at the end of the conversation. You may have seen these. Looking for gathering and understanding of what design processes look like at the K-12 level right now. These are excellent. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and join you back in the Adobe Connect room. And we'll go ahead and proceed to the next slide. So this is something you may be able to relate to. I wanted to share a little bit about how this partnership came to be and why I decided to reach out to a higher education institution. So at the time when I was hired at this K-12 school, the purpose was they wanted to start an online program that could be used for any students as a supplemental initial credit course. And at the time, it was a very traditional high school setting with your traditional bell schedule, and it wasn't anything that we had a lot of flexibility to really switch things around for the online. So we were trying to do something really innovative, in the confines of our, high school structure. So one of the things that I wanted to do was give the teachers who were going through this process an opportunity to seek feedback from instructional designers who had more of the formal training, and also to give them some opportunities to connect with research. I did feel like because we were one of the first to do this in our state, I wanted to have the research to kind of back up some of the decisions that we were making. So I reached out to a contact in the university, and really I was hoping that they would tell me, are we on the right track? So that's kind of how this got started. And that's how I also met Kendom. So again, practitioner in a K-12 district. I was the coordinator of online learning, and Kendom was a doctoral candidate in Research University, Indiana University. So we came together and put together a couple ideas, and that's how we got to today. So at the time, Indiana is, I had support really from our school board and our administration. They were very forward-thinking and wanting to be one of the first, high schools to really do this and offer an online program out of the high school. Plus, we had a lot of support from the Indiana Department of Education at the time. They were giving grants for these kind of innovative things, and our high school actually got a grant to go one-to-one with iPads. So we wanted to be a provider of high-quality supplemental online courses for all high school students, and eventually work towards offering an entire kind of core 40 program that we could use if a student wanted to go all the way through as an online learner. So this part was what was a little tricky, is that the teachers I was working with, they didn't necessarily see themselves yet as instructional designers. But we wanted to give them those opportunities. And really, I think teachers would probably testify that they know their students very well and they know how to connect with their students. And so using curriculum that, canned or out of a textbook sometimes is just not going to resonate. So we wanted teachers to not only design in an online format, which was very new for many of the teachers in the cadre. We also said, we don't want you to use textbooks. We really want you to go beyond. And we also want you to design with mobile learning in mind, because we were also moving towards a one-to-one iPad. So there was a lot of challenges that we were up against. But ultimately, I wanted to empower those teachers so that they knew that they were the designers. And also, I wanted them to understand that online learning could align to their values. And as educators, we think, I want to connect with my students. I really value collaboration. I really value those relationships. So my mission was really to help kind of debunk some of those myths that online learning had to be very isolating and that you couldn't do all the things that you could do in a classroom setting. So this is a great resource if you're interested in learning more about the online learning trends in the United States. The Keeping Pace report actually goes through all the different states and tells you a little bit more about the different online initiatives. It'll include the service centers and charter schools and all sorts of great things. And I've seen Michigan in there quite a bit. So this is a great place to start, and you guys may also have some additional resources to share. Any questions right now? Shall I keep going? I'll look at the chat for just a second. Okay, fabulous. Okay. So as I was talking about some of those misperceptions, so the big challenge that I was up against in starting this online program was that at the time, online learning was really reserved for credit recovery. Do you guys know what I mean by this? Students would go to a certain lab during the day. Yes, connections. Yeah, Diane, you're with me. So yeah, so students would go to this lab and they would complete different courses, and sometimes they would get through a class, relatively fast, but basically they had to fail a class first and then they could go take the class online. So what we were trying to do is really say, online learning is not just for credit recovery. Online learning is for everyone. Your parents are learning online. They're renewing their license online. They're getting their CEUs. And so what we decided to do, because we realized credit recovery is still very valuable, but we wanted to have kind of 3 different areas of development with this program. And so we decided to launch with a sector called Ignite. And so that was going to be for initial credit. That way we could start to help students understand that you can take an online class in the summer and get ahead, or you can take a class to overcome your scheduling challenges. Then we would launch our credit recovery, and then we would launch even like a non-formal learning kind of space where students could learn things that were interesting to them, like photography for fun, a digital photography class, or digital citizenship for parents. We really wanted that third piece to be for the community as well. The other piece was who is an online designer, and I think a lot of the teachers I was working with, they didn't necessarily think that they were considered an instructional designer. They didn't have the formal training, but really they were kind of forced to be instructional designers. So it was really an exciting time for the program. We got a lot of press. This was just a snippet from an article in a newspaper. There was things like this all the time coming out and showing the community what we were doing. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kendon and let her talk more about the research.
Thanks, Joanna. So let's really start by asking, what is designer rethinking? So before I start talking, can people hear me? Is my mic? Okay, great. So the term designer rethinking was actually coined by Nigel Cross, and it's really based on the premise that design is not a rule-based scientific activity that can be solved with a process model or theory. And coming from the field of instructional design, traditionally we have this penchant to use the word design in every aspect of our vocabulary. Yet we are very incapable of, talking about the broader philosophical and theoretical dimensions of design. And from reading the field, there appears to be a dissonance in theory and practice. And this has been, talked. I think Gordon Rowland was the first person who brought this up in the early 90s, and he said that,
instead of focusing on this overproduction of instructional design models and instructional theories, perhaps we really need to look at how instructional designers are actually doing design in the real world. So this way of thinking has garnered criticism among emergent scholars in the instructional design field. And although there has been a few empirical studies that have attempted to theorize practice, the focus has still again been on the process model or the prescriptive theory as directing the design and analyzing the efficiency and effectiveness of an ID model. I'm sure some of you must have heard of the ADDIE models, or this ton of models out there. And really, rather than approaching the actual practice through the eyes and experience of the designer. So a lot of my work has been derived from the wider field of design for this study and in my research as a design researcher in education. So Horst Riddle and Melvin Weber, in the context of social policy, argue that typically in the real world we are fraught with what they refer to as wicked problems that cannot be solved by applying a purely scientific or a rule-based heuristic approach. So we see the same thing in design, and if you're engaged in design, in instructional design or in design in different domains, you do realize that most of the times these problems are very ill-defined, and it's impossible to just use a model and see the outcome of that design. So really diverging from this way of thinking, the purpose of this research is that teachers need to be viewed as designers in their own right, and the reason why is because they are constantly designing instruction or adapting instructional materials on a daily basis. And even if designing is not foregrounded in their professional practice, they are still designing. So that was the main purpose of the research, and also really looking at how do they act as designers, think and act as designers in a very unique context, especially for someone who's designing a course, online course for the first time. So my purpose in this research was really learning what is their design process like, what are their ways of thinking, how do they act and think like designers in the wider field of design. So this was a single case qualitative study, used a convenience sampling strategy. So we sent an invitation to 10 teachers, and out of which 8 teachers agreed to participate in the research, with Joanna being the online course coordinator. She was also a participant. The data sources mainly consisted of the semi-structured interviews. I had my field notes, and also we had a focus group interview towards the end of the study. I also had access, I was also given access to all of their courses, so I was able to go in and look at some of the artifacts that they designed, their interactions in the Canvas learning management system. So I also used that as part of my analysis. So the data analysis I used was using Robert Stake's method of direct interpretation and categorical aggregation. So I'll talk a little bit about the context of the school, and I'll hand it over to Joanna to give more detail about the whole online learning initiative. So this is a public high school, a Midwestern public high school. They had a total of 2,366 students, with 74% graduating, graduating students attending college. And this is also a school, as Joanna mentioned earlier, that was launching their first online initiative program.
Thanks, Kindam. Okay, so I'm going to talk just a little bit more about context here. So basically, we started out with an e-learning cadre. So rather than putting a call out there to any high school teacher, there was a call and a selection process involved, just so that it would make teachers understand the commitment kind of working up towards this goal, this shared vision. And so with the cadre, we did spend a lot of time discussing and building a shared vision around what we really wanted and how we wanted to represent our district with this online program. The cadre initially consisted of 20 teachers, but there was some attrition through the process. You know how it is. Teachers will get into the depths of the design, and it's a very time-consuming process, as many of you know. There were incentives. We did give all the teachers hardware. Everybody got a MacBook, and there was a development stipend and professional development that was built in through the year that you were developing. And so also through some of that professional development, the courses did receive quite a bit of guidance with the process. So that's where we were able to pull in some IST doctoral students. We were able to look at each other's courses and give lots of feedback. So my role was really looking at a couple things. The first was quality assurance. I wanted to make sure that what we were putting out there was kind of different than what I had seen before. And that was one of the questions the teachers kept asking me. What is this going to look like? And I said, well, it hasn't been created yet. So I really wanted them to think differently about teaching and learning in an online setting. We did conduct usability tests with students and get feedback, and we also did some different peer review activities. My goal also was to lead all the professional development, so we met periodically throughout the year, and also do all those administrative things that come with it. So we did have teachers sign an MOU. I also did all the marketing, the website management, all the registration. And also just to be a voice of the cadre and relaying their concerns to our administrators to make sure that their voices were being heard. They were ultimately creating the process for future cadres. So this is what the process looked like. We started out again with teacher recruitment, trying to find out who was going to be committed to this process. They would sign the MOU, and then the professional development really started. So the conceptualization was probably the most painful part, and that was the part that involved a lot of coaching as far as kind of rethinking what things look like in an online environment and helping teachers understand that it's different than putting your face-to-face course online in an online setting. We asked teachers to have just 1 or 2 modules completed, and we did a lot of feedback on those 1 to 2 modules. And then we had some informal peer review come in there, and this is also where they teamed up with an IST doc student for kind of a one-on-one session where they got some feedback. Then we went through usability testing, and there was a lot of reflection and revision happening at that time. I think for the teachers, getting that feedback from students was probably the biggest driving force for some of the changes that they made in their course, making it more engaging, adding more videos, stuff like that. And then after that, their course was completed, and then they did a more formal peer review, but this time it was with somebody outside of the cadre. So we wanted to have them connect with people who really didn't have a strong understanding of what a high quality online course looked like, and really sought their feedback. And then we went into some more professional development. So now that you have developed your course, what does it look like to teach in an online setting? And there was some coaching that way. They would have an opportunity to teach online, and then the process repeats. It's a cycle. So that's a little bit more context about the development. I'm going to turn it back to Kendom.
Thank you, Joanna. So this is just a sample of a holistic interpretation of the codes that emerged from the data, and really moves back to illuminate the overall design process of these high school teachers. So as you can see, these were some of the most influential elements in their design process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I go over the assertions of the study. But you can see that they do face constraints, they use a number of technological tools, pedagogical tools, they value a community of practice. The role of the online learning coordinator also played a big role in their design process, and the role of reflection and feedback. So the findings from our study, let me go back. The findings from our study really highlights that, teachers are designers, right? And they bring in a very unique perspective as instructional designers, and we have so much more to learn about their design process. So, the major assertions from the study was that, like designers in other contexts, where there are many constraints, teachers do face a number of constraints. And in this very specific context, the types of constraints that they reported facing were, oh, can you all hear me now? I'm so sorry. Okay, perfect. So these were the major assertions from our study, and like I was explaining, teachers do face a number of constraints when designing their first online course, and some of these major constraints were such as conceptualizing the design process, like Joanna mentioned, they wanted to know the outcome. And, as we can see, design is very messy, so it's very difficult to talk about the outcome. So I think just conceptualizing, framing that problem was very challenging for the teachers. And one of the big challenges that they reported also was translating, their face-to-face content into an online format. As teachers, we all know, time is a very big luxury. So, a lot of them reported time management as one of the big, constraints. And, since this was since most of them didn't have any experience with teaching an online course or even designing an online course, they had very insufficient knowledge of communication tools, collaboration tools. So that's where Joanna really came in, and played a really big role in providing those scaffolds and supports. Teachers also reported using a variety of technological tools such as Google Docs. A number of them were freewares apart from VoiceThread. They use Symbaloo, for example. And we also saw that most of these recommendations for using these tools came from the online coordinator, their teacher conferences, and sometimes just doing a random Google search. And the other assertion is that teachers, don't design alone. And I think that's something very important to highlight out here in this whole project is the role of the cadre and how that really helped support them throughout the whole process. So they really reported valuing that time that they had together in I'm saying not designing the same course, but having that support group, bouncing back ideas back and forth with each other, really helped them, give them some confidence, but also made them reflect on their own designs or, their thinking as they were designing your online course. And you can also see that, like designers, teachers do engage in reflection quite a lot, and they really, for example, they value the feedback from their peers. So I think they had a time, maybe Joanna can jump in and talk a little bit about that later, or if you have questions, where I think they looked at each other's course, gave each other feedback, even if they were in different subject areas. But also as they were teaching their course, as they began teaching their course, they also made adjustments to their course based on their student feedback. So there was a high level of reflection going on. Okay. So what are the key takeaways from this study? As a researcher, I, this study was a real big starting point for me to really, make that inquiry into how teachers are thinking as designers. And uh, I still feel that, we still have, although we know how design occurred in this very specific context, I do want to point out that this is a single case study, so it's difficult to make uh, overt generalizations, of how online course design occurs in other schools. But I hope that maybe by sharing the kind of design process that these teachers followed, or the role of the online learning coordinator, I think that's something that you can take away with you. Um, for me, I'm continuing to study how teachers act as designers. I was in Papua New Guinea 2 years ago working on a health curriculum design with rural teachers out there. And I am continuing in that similar path of research.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, Kendam, I'm going to just jump in here on the takeaways because my perspective was very different. Well, not very different, but I'm not coming at this from a research perspective. So for me, I'm just going to reiterate that opportunity for teachers to get to connect to one another, both in their disciplines and outside of their disciplines, and connecting with people who were in the cadre who could really share and relate versus teacher colleagues who were not part of that process. So they really had lots of different opportunities to connect with different audiences. I thought that was really valuable, and the biggest piece was really getting a chance to hear from their students. And so, it encouraged them to really build in some feedback loops throughout their designs and not get too far in their design without stopping to get some student feedback. And also, I thought, based on what our teachers said, it kind of validated for us the importance of having leadership on board with the teachers and really supporting them. It's really hard to design online classes from scratch with very limited resources, especially professional development opportunities. So I thought it was valuable for us to have a leader that was moving us all kind of in the same direction as well. I see there's a question here. I was surprised there was no element related to teachers' content knowledge in the results. Kendam, do you want to address that question?
Yes, I was actually just typing that up. Junka, yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that question. So the primary purpose or the main questions for this study was really just asking about their design process and not really their content knowledge. And you're right, I don't think these are very independent constructs. I think it's highly related. And the main themes I think that came out from the data was the technological tools and the pedagogical tools. So it was as reported by the teachers as being valuable in their design process. So I think their content knowledge was backgrounded, but of course it was a big part of, that informed the way they designed their online course. Did I answer your question?
Good. There's some more typing going on. I'm just gonna talk briefly about some information that you might want to look at after this webinar. So I have some Google links here for you, and I used a shortener. But we were able to get a story written on our partnership, talking about the IST department teaming up with a school district. And this is certainly available for you to look at afterwards. I'll also throw this in the chat. And then also we had our publication is also available for free to download at this link. And I will also throw that into the chat if you'd like to check that out. So I would like to spend the rest of our time, we have about 24 minutes left, just discussing. I'd love to hear from you. Sometimes the format of a webinar is a little tricky, so please feel free to chime in. And I'm going to throw this question out there as a place to start, but we certainly can move this conversation wherever you'd like to go. So if teachers are to be understood as instructional designers in online classes, what resources are needed to support them in those designerly thinking skills? So we would love to hear from you. And if you don't necessarily feel like speaking out, you could also go back to that Padlet and add some notes there, or you could use the chat room here. So whatever you feel most comfortable doing. And I'm just going to pause for a moment. Such a good point Julia just made, that if you're training in a variety of tools, you don't necessarily, if you don't know what's available, then it's really hard to branch out. And so one of the things that I did in our role was try to introduce the cadre to a lot of different functions that were possible, and then offer some suggestions for tools. So if you're looking for collaboration, here's 5 things to consider. I agree that increasing that awareness of what's out there and what you can do with it is pretty essential.
Hi, Mary. I see you're asking where do design principles show up in teacher preparation and professional development. I've been studying a little bit about teacher practice for my current work, and I think the role of reflection is one of the design principles that's really well established, I think, in the teaching in teacher preparation or in their professional development. But I think it's not the other principles that we talk about in instructional design is not really articulated in the field, especially in teacher professional development, and I think there still needs to be more work to be done in that area.
Catherine, thank you for adding some context for us. I would love to know if what we're seeing in this particular study is something that you have also seen in your work supporting online learning.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. This is Catherine. I figured instead of trying to type furiously as the questions were coming up, I'd just talk. Yeah, we've seen some growth, albeit not very much. Did a study in 2012 and then again this past year with Leonard Shimbo out of Arizona State University, looking at online teaching and within not only pre-service education, but also in-service education, more at the master's degree level. And unfortunately, we haven't seen the mark move too much, but in the programs that it has moved, there have been more, instead of it being voluntary and kind of an add-on to what they're learning, being more incorporated within their curriculum. And I think eventually we'll see a shift where this is becoming part and parcel of the whole entire professional development and preparation programs, but at this point we're not seeing that. So yeah, and like you said, Kendam, the apprenticeship piece is really important because that's what it is to kind of learn how to do it alongside somebody who's a veteran teacher in an online environment.
Yeah, thank you so much for chiming in. Do you think that, this is open to anybody, but do you feel like schools of education in higher ed should be asking students to develop curricula in these online settings as part of their projects and their different blocks before student teaching? No, that's okay. I'm going to ask it again. So in higher education institutes, school of education, do you feel like pre-service teachers should be learning how to design for online learning as part of their kind of formal education?
Yes, maybe I can jump in on that question too, Joanna. I was teaching pre-service teachers in IU in Indiana University, and we did have that a very short part in the curriculum, but I think there's not much focus. We gloss over what online learning is, but I think it's very important for them to actually, do some form of or learn some form of design principles in their, it could be using computers in education class, or I don't know how these classes might look like in other universities. But I think doing more project-based work, like working towards developing something like that using these technological tools, would definitely help them, prepare.
Mary, thank you for your question. Can you elaborate a little more for us?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, so there's this notion of designerly thinking right now that's really popular because of a number of reasons. First, can everybody hear me?
I can hear you just
I'll
fine.
wait for some. Okay. There are a number of conceptions around designerly thinking, and some of it's even, I think, out of the movement of maker pedagogy, right? Where with engineering and things like that. And so there's a lot of different approaches to thinking about the creativity elements, for instance, within an online course. There is design, like universal design for learning. And then there's sort of an almost like behaviorist approach to instructional design. And so then I was thinking about how if you were going to teach that kind of a class, then you have to pick a theory. You got to survey the theory, the different ideas. What do you have time for? Which kinds of design orientations are optimal for different kinds of classes? So mostly just a bunch of things running through my head. So because I really appreciate this opportunity to think. I don't have any answers, and I don't know if anybody does, but just like interesting things that I was thinking about.
Thank you, Mary. I don't have an answer either, but I think you pose an excellent question. Maybe Kendam can chime in on that. One of the things too I noticed as I was supporting teachers is they were doing a lot of things that, have formal names, but they didn't name it necessarily. So that's another piece to consider.
Yes, I agree with you, Joanna, because like I mentioned earlier, I think in for teachers, what's really foregrounded in their professional practice is being a teacher, right? And I think design is really backgrounded, but they're still very embedded in designing. And I think, Mary, as you mentioned, uh, when we talk about what is designer rethinking, what are some of these competencies that these designers have, is definitely, yeah, creativity, being able to problem solve, framing the problem. Reflection is a really big key of, thinking like a designer. So there's, I'm afraid to just say, oh, there's this one method or this, book that we can, give to teachers. I think it's we're all learning as we go, and, I think we can learn a lot from, if you look at the field and, like you said, architecture, product design, a lot of other fields of design are, rethinking the way they are training their own designers. So what I really want to mention is I don't think we need to take away the design from the teachers. They're already designing, so it's important to understand how they are engaging in design so we're able to support them without undermining, uh, who they are or what they bring into the whole design conversation.
There's still some typing going on, but I was going to just add our Padlet does have some resources in there that we personally have used and enjoy using with teachers if we're going to help give them some of those supports. I really liked the Center for Innovation and Research and Technology. They had a Pedagogy First page that we've linked, and then also I thought the course workload estimator was really interesting. Those were two that Kendom found, and I'm going to plop those in here for us. But I think that was something I realized our teachers were unsure of. That first is, I think we're used to thinking in terms of 90-minute blocks or 60-minute blocks. And so when moving to an online environment, how do we shift into thinking about that differently, and how long does it actually take? And, sometimes the trial and error, we over-assign things, just not realizing how much time it is going to take for students. If you have anything to add to this list, I know this is not comprehensive in any way, shape, or form, please let us know. We'd love to have some shared resources.
Look, I think we have linked our paper, the published paper in this presentation. I think if you click on this link, it should take you there. I can copy.
Okay, so I will go ahead and wrap up, but I want to extend a really warm thank you to our presenters today for giving us an awesome presentation and being just so engaging and helping to facilitate a great discussion. So thank you again to Joanna and to Kendall. If you guys would like to share your contact information in the chat box, I believe Joanna may have already shared that as well, but if anyone would like to reach out to our presenters today, feel free to do so and follow up with them about their research and some of their other work as well. Before we wrap up, though, I just wanted to mention a couple ongoing MVLRI projects. We do have a podcast series, which we call Virtual Viewpoints, and you can learn more about that Virtual Viewpoints podcast series by clicking the link there. We just basically have 20 to 25-minute episodes where we talk to people who are doing interesting work in the field of online and blended learning and incorporating research into that work. And secondly, we have a guest blogger program. So if you would actually like to share more about your own work, you can check out our guest blogger program by clicking that link and seeing some of our former blog posts, our past blog posts, and reach out to us to learn more about how you might be able to author a blog post for us. We do have a webinar upcoming next month. We'll be hearing from Brian Mann at Penn State University and Stephen Kotuk from the University of Texas at El Paso about choice cyber charter schools and the educational marketplace for rural school districts. You can find out more about all of our webinars and upcoming webinars at the link that I will display on this next page here. And this is basically all the ways that you can reach out to us or learn more about us. So you can email us at mvlri@mivu.org, offer some feedback and suggestions on our webinar initiative or any other of our projects. You can sign up for our mailing list by clicking the link there to stay up to date on all of our presentations, podcasts, papers, publications, anything else like that. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Our handles are listed there, as well as our LinkedIn page. Our YouTube channel link is linked there as well. You can actually expect to see the recording of this webinar posted to our YouTube channel within the next 24 hours or so. And you can find all of our past recordings hosted at our YouTube channel of our webinars. And then the last link there is to our webinars page. So you can see all of our upcoming webinars as well as see the list of all of our archived webinars as well. So we want to wish everyone a great rest of your Wednesday and a great rest of your week. We thank our presenters again for being so gracious and sharing some information about their work. And thank all of you for attending. Have a great rest of your week and take care.